Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where I can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 125 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on 5 ways to reduce holiday stress. And this is such a good, timely episode because, let's face it, Christmas is going to be a wonderful time where there's no stress and it's filled up with joy, merriment, and everything else. But let's face it, in reality, there can be quite a bit of stress that comes along with a Christmas, but especially if you're a parent or with a young family, you've got tons of presents to buy for and more. This is going to be a really good episode that should hopefully help you avoid stress this holiday season. 18th of December 2021 as I record this. So moving on to psychology news section, there's some really, there are some really good ones here though. So we're reading on the British Psychological Society Research Digest. The first one is, once a meanie, always a meanie. Toddlers are harsh judges of moral character, and of course, as this is about toddlers and babies, this is just going to be funny and, to be honest, quite brilliant. Over the past 10 years, developmental psychologists have been astounded by the young age at which children appear to be aware of the moral qualities of others' actions. At just 4 months, babies already react with surprise when others engage in unequal distribution of the trees and resources. They also snub at these unfair individuals in social interactions by the age of 24 months and expect others to do the same. Other forms of moral judgment may emerge even sooner. As early as 3 months of age, infants show distinct preferences for those who help or those who hinder others. In thinking about these nuanced moral judgments, researchers have become interested in figuring out their underlying mental structure. Do children's moral rules loosely operate like a loose analogy, where judgments passed on the basis of one principle have little effect on judgments on the basis of another? Or is there a deeper underpinning mental framework that gives rise to a multitude of connected moral expectations? A recent study in PNAS by a duo of American researchers breaks new ground on this fascinating question. It reveals that toddlers are guided by a core mental representation of what is meant to be a moral person, albeit with some potential concerning caveats. Within this moral framework, a single false pass risks in entirely sweeping an individual from a child's good books. So of course, as I hinted at, because this is to do with toddlers and babies, this is just brilliant, and this is actually just quite funny because, mainly because this sort of research really gets us to question children, and because traditionally, let's face it, children are thought of these cute little things that are sort of just blank slate, they just play, and to be honest, nothing actually goes on inside their heads. But of course, we've all done developmental psychology at one point or another, and we just know that's false though. But it's always good to be pushing the research boundaries and exploring this even more, and some of it is actually quite funny. Personally, I don't think I would ever go into developmental psychology. In fact, no, I just wouldn't. And even in my final year, there's an option to do advanced developmental psychology. I will not be doing that. But it's always really funny though. Well, to hear the research digest from the BPS. So the second one is, we mistake information we've Googled for our own knowledge. Okay. In many ways, the internet has democratized knowledge, allowing people to access more information than they could possibly dream of reading. No matter where your interests lie, there is almost certainly something new to learn on the line. But is this immediately accessible trove of information making us confused about what knowledge is art and what is the internet? According to a new paper, it might be. The series of 8 studies finds that those searching online are sometimes unable to distinguish what knowledge belongs to them and what belongs to the internet, and that it could even cause unwarranted overconfidence in the future attempts to remember things though. So, but there's not a great amount to actually say on this though. But this does remind me of the Google effect, which I think off the top of my head is Sparrow 2001 of the top. The Google effect plays into the whole transferable memory though, because we don't really remember stuff because we believe that you can go back to the internet or another source of information at a later date to find this information though. So it's always this is just something that we need to be mindful of. And the last one is calls to mental health helplines increased early in pandemic. From early 2020, concerns were raised about the impact of the pandemic on mental health. The stresses of lockdown, social isolation, financial precarity, and widespread grief were all considered to be potential triggers for poor mental health, along with issues such as increased domestic violence. A new study published in Nature looks at what helpline calls can reveal about mental health during this period. It finds that an increase in the calls to helplines during the early days of the pandemic, largely driven by fear, loneliness, and worries about physical health. So I'm not necessarily actually going to address the content of like that bit of psychology news, but what I am going to say though, is that mental health is really important, and we all need to be mindful of it. For example, I don't know where I wrote it recently though, but oh yes, it's actually in today's episode. Yes, I mentioned it there, but don't be scared about calling helplines and getting help for your mental health there, because as I always say, it doesn't make you look weak, pathetic, whatever, because your mental health is important though. And on the Psychology World podcast, we do have a lot of mental health resources and lots of mental health episodes. Of course, none of it is ever official advice, but it might be a helpful place to start though. And because there's not a lot going on in my in my personal life at the moment of interest to a podcast audience, except from yesterday, I got my booster jab and I'm feeling fine, healthy, I haven't felt sick, and nothing is hurting there. But I really do encourage you to get to the jab though. And besides that, I'm actually going to skip the personal update. So as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment on the channel at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, and you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi_whiteley. I always love to hear from you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Forensic Psychology, and I decided to switch up the sponsored product for today's episode though, because I know that I've been pushing clinical psychology, formulation in psychotherapy, and abnormal psychology quite a bit recently though. So Forensic Psychology is an absolutely brilliant book, and it's one of my most popular books because it's a great book that really helps you to develop a great understanding of what forensic psychology actually is, because it's not profiling. So if you want a great, easy to understand book that will take you to great engaging depth about forensic psychology, and also tells you the truth about forensic psychology, then I cannot recommend it enough. So you can get the ebooks and audiobooks from all major ebook and audiobook retailers, and you can order the paperback and hardback versions from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. So let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So with the Christmas Day and other holidays fast approaching, we need to acknowledge that these can actually be quite stressful times. And as psychology students and psychology professionals, we all know the downside of that stress it can have on our mental health, and no one, and I really don't want any of this, and no one wants to experience a decrease in mental health at this time of year, especially. So the entire point of today's episode is that I'll give you 5 ways to reduce stress during the holiday season. So what are these 5 ways? Be mindful of worsening mental health difficulties. And the entire reason why this is classed as a clinical psychology episode is because of this point entirely. Because as I mentioned on the podcast before, mental health conditions difficulties are maladaptive coping mechanisms, and stress tends to make them worse, meaning the holiday season can be extremely difficult for some people. So we need to be mindful of this. So whether it's our own mental health, or if it's one of our friends or family members that suffers from a mental health difficulty, we need to help them get through the season. Then you'll probably find that because we've showed some kindness to them, that they'll probably help us out too. Also, it isn't helpful to mental health sufferers that the entire holiday season we're constantly said to be happy and cheery, and now this isn't helpful to these people, especially if they aren't doing well during the holidays though, because that could add to the feelings that are messed up and something is wrong with them, because of course they're not happy, but everyone's telling them that they're meant to be happy, so why aren't they, and what if something is wrong with them? So overall, we all need to support each other, and if you, your friends or family members aren't doing well, then support them of course, but don't feel bad for calling a doctor or a helpline. Plan fun things, and we all know during this crazy season of the holidays, there's so much shopping to do, presents and food to buy, and then there's lots of food to eat. Then you need to check who's coming on the big day, and on and on and on. It never ends until the actual bigger day. That was like, this is why I always try and help my mum as much as I can in the holiday season, because I don't want her to get stressed as she plans at Christmas, and I don't want you to either. So this is why planning fun things are just so important, because we all need time to create new fun memories and do things that take you away from the stress of planning, shopping and cooking. So some examples of this could be that you walk around your neighbourhood to look at the Christmas lights. That if there wasn't Omicron, I probably would. I probably would do that. Or you would bake something fun and interesting, or simply have some quality family time without the stress. Finding alternatives with all the amazing people who will listen, which is you, or reads this podcast, coming from all over the world with different life circumstances and situations. This point is absolutely critical, and it applies to all of us at different points in a time, though, because some people will be in a financial difficulty, and I've heard this from other people about the stress that this causes them at Christmas, since Christmas is thought to be a time of overeating, indulgence, and spending a lot of money. But for some people, this just isn't possible, making them feel bad and cause them a lot of stress, since they may believe that they're failing their family, but of course they aren't. As a result, finding alternatives can be a great way this holiday season, because instead of stressing out about buying lots of presents, you could get your family together and get them to pick one person to buy one present for. Now I know whether this sounds awful, awful though to some people. I'm no exception. When I first read that, I was thinking, oh, I would hate that. Because of course, this means that they're going to get less presents. But if money is tight, and if a Christmas is unaffordable, then this still what gives the people a chance to celebrate Christmas, and maybe the family can put money towards another aspect of Christmas, like the Christmas Day feast. If times are tough, don't hide it. Building upon the last point, the economy is constantly changing, and I also like to know when you're going to be reading or listening to this episode. Because you could be listening to when it's a release, or you could be listening to it in 3 years' time. So I don't know what the economy is going to be like. However, Christmas is always a reminder for some families about how little what they can afford, and for other families is a reminder of what they can no longer afford. Yet a major problem with this is that children tend to notice what is missing, and they too can get stressed and anxious as their imaginations wonder what's happening, as well as if this doesn't only happen to young children. As it was only a few months ago that I started to get concerned. There were financial problems in my family, but we spoke about it, and then they reassured me that nothing was wrong. So if times are tough, do talk about it. Not only will it help relax your children and family who could be imagining something a lot worse, talking about it might make you feel better too. The holiday season is for pacing yourself, and this I cannot agree more with. So finally, I cannot recommend enough that you do pace yourself during the holiday season. Due to the entire idea of last minute planning, shopping and cooking, that's just silly, and it will surely lead to burnout and distress, and you do not want to be panicking at any point during the holiday season, and you don't want anything to bottleneck. For example, you don't want to start your hours of cooking whilst you have children to keep entertained and talk at your family members. Therefore, I do recommend that you figure out how to pace yourself during the holiday season, so everything is calm, relaxed and near perfect. And there's one more thing that I actually want to conclude today's episode with. So the holiday season will never be perfect. That is a fantasy that will guarantee stress as things that go wrong. But whilst the holiday season can be trying, the reward of the big day and the love, food and presents with family and friends can make it all worth it. So I wish you all a happy Christmas, happy holidays, and whatever else you celebrate. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope that you got something out of it. And if you know someone who would need today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And definitely check out Forensic Psychology. It's available in all the usual places, and that actually does make the perfect Christmas gift, as I do the rest of my books. So happy Christmas, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.